All right, well, hey, welcome everyone. My name is Dr. John Cordell. I am the Human Factors Advisor to Commander Naval Surface Force Atlantic, Rear Admiral Brenda McLean. And I'm here today to host a panel on human factors and human performance. And, as we know, our sailors have incredibly challenging and rewarding jobs out there with extended deployments, maintenance periods, manning shortfalls, but still a job to do. And so their physical and their spiritual and their mental fitness is incredibly important. And I'm very honored to be up here today with really three gentlemen from the Navy and Coast Guard who are at the pinnacle of this situation, because they have their fingers and their pulse on the people of our services. People are probably the most important part of we call it the kill chain. And if they are not fully engaged and fully able to perform their tasks, it doesn't matter what weaponry we have or what machinery we're running. So I'd like to introduce, I'll mispronounce the names here probably, but Admiral Brett Midas, who runs the Navy Culture and Force Resiliency Office at the OPNAV N-17, Admiral Gregory Todd, Chief of Chaplains, and Admiral David Beretta, Coast Guard Chief of Personnel. So with that, for the flow of today, what I thought we would do is let each individual introduce what they do, kind of what they're about. I have a few questions to get the conversation started, and then probably around 1 o'clock I'd like to open it up for the audience. And the good news is we have time for each individual member of the audience to ask one question. So please start writing, start thinking now. And with that, I'll hand over the mic to Admiral Midas.
Oh, hi, Brett Midas, as mentioned, did a really good job on the name, so thank you for that. Used to be OPNAV N-17 was the 21st Century Sailor Office. And as part of Get Real, Get Better, and we'll talk about that in a second, we recognize that a fresh vision for how we build our people, leaders, and teams was appropriate. And with that, there should be a name change. And so 21st Century Sailor was a name that didn't really easily help people understand what it was we were trying to do. We think that by focusing on building culture and building force resilience, it better helps people get their arms around all the programs that we have. So everything from harmful behaviors, DEI, family readiness, a number of different programs that are under this hat, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. Thank you.
Okay. Admiral?
Thanks, John. Admiral Dave Beretta. I'm commander of the Personnel Service Center. So if you think about on the Navy side, some elements of BUPERS, some elements of the Naval Personnel Command. We have all military personnel. So the detailers, the assignment officers, the boards panels, all the way until we see you throughout your whole career. There's a couple other pieces under there as well. The recruiting command falls under us. So we, as does the pay and personnel center. So we say that we see you from the recruiting table all the way until we're getting your retiree checks out to you and your families. From there, there's a couple other elements that fall under us is the Community Services Command. So we have MWR pieces as well as the Coast Guard exchange system, Coast Guard records, all of those things kind of fall under us. So we have a unique umbrella to kind of implement some of the changes that the Coast Guard is looking at right now that we'll talk about moving forward here.
Awesome. Chap?
So Chaplain Greg Todd, Navy chaplaincy, has in its portfolio not only the Navy, the Marine Corps, but also the Coast Guard. So, and we supply the chaplain to the Merchant Marine Academy. So our enterprise is very broad in terms of what we see in terms of leadership, in terms of culture, and connection with people. So our interest, I think, in this human performance is really in the realm of the spiritual, and I want to make a distinction there. We're not necessarily talking religious, but just the idea of spiritual readiness, that we are human beings made up of mind, body, spirit, very ancient idea that we need to be attentive to. And so our concern is that we create a normalized conversation within the sea services of the full dimension of humanity, mind, body, spirit, and that we create an environment wherein the spirit can be attended to, strengthened, and made ready for conflict or any challenge that that folks are going to face.
Awesome. All right. So CNA Gilday challenged us a while ago to, quote, get real, get better. And that means to embrace the red, take a look at something, and evaluate it and see if it needs changing. So I would like to ask, whoever would like to take it, or all three, If you can think of something when you took over this job or that you're dealing with now where you looked at it and said, hey, there's room for improvement here, and what you're doing or what you did in that area.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I know it's under the CNO's heading, but if you read the description of it, I think, if there's self-assessment there and the willingness to get better, I think, when the Commandant came in last summer, one of her main line of efforts was for the workforce, and for us to find a way to transform the workforce. Her kind of key tagline is, tomorrow looks different, so will we. And she's fond of saying that, the status quo is our greatest risk when it comes to the workforce. So, as far as self-assessments go, she wants us to look at everything, every process that we have, particularly as it relates to the workforce, and spend some time thinking about that. We've evolved over time. We have a lot of processes in place for our folks. We have, how we assess them, how we recruit them, how we manage their careers, and the Commandant wants us to take a real close look and see if that makes sense for us, because in a lot of ways, the way that we have been doing things doesn't make sense for a modern workforce, and actually doesn't meet the readiness needs of the Coast Guard right now, especially as we're asked to do more and more things globally, further offshore. And so, one of the key things that we're looking at that really needs a revamp is this up or out process. The pyramid that we've created over time just doesn't work for the workforce in a lot of ways. There's, the workforce has a lot of interest in, family, things that they want to do in their career. Not everybody wants to sit on this stage as an admiral, and we understand that. Everyone doesn't want to be, the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. So how can we accommodate that? And those are the type of programs that we're looking at right now. A couple examples. One of the ones that's kind of modeled after what the Navy is doing is advanced to position, and we're also doing what we call temp promotion for officers right now. So that if we have critical billets that we can't fill, we've gone through the assignment process, rather than forcing someone to go somewhere where it's not a fit, and maybe even forcing them to retire or resign instead of going to that job. We've found a mechanism by which we offer it, for folks who are qualified, and then junior folks, if they're willing to take a promotion or an advancement, to give themselves an opportunity to prove themselves at that next rank, we'll promote them and advance them temporarily for that next tour, especially in critically trained specialties where we need naval engineers, where we need certain things, financial officers, prevention officers, in the ports doing vessel inspections, those kind of things. Some of the other things we're looking at is, the opportunity to kind of, take a pause in your career, for folks to kind of opt out of an advancement or a promotion if the timing doesn't work out for them professionally or for their families, and they're amenable to kind of either staying in the area that they're at or, possibly just taking a break from promotion and then getting back on cycle afterwards. So those are the type of programs we're looking at to hopefully expand those options, flexibility for our workforce.
Great. Thank you.
Our foray into self-assessment and self-correction really began when we started doing more data collection, more reflection on what do we mean by spiritual readiness. And we were working with Dr. Lisa Miller up at Columbia. And she, her research shows a propensity among humanity towards the spiritual that's particularly heightened between the 18 to 25-year-old age range. And that research kind of got our attention. We said 18 to 25-year-olds is our key audience. That's who we really need to get ready for conflict. But we looked at our chapels and we said, how many 18 to 25-year-olds are in the chapels? And it was a sobering reality. Mostly were retirees. Some particular fleet concentration areas, mostly retirees. So we looked at a different model, and rather than a parish-style model for the chapel, we said we tried out a campus ministry-style model. So we moved the priest from just being in the chapel to being close to the piers and being there in the barracks and all. And in that short time period, the priest had more interaction, more baptisms, more sacramental interactions in 6 months than we had previously in the previous few years. So it was really changing our vision, our model to say, how do we connect with people where they're at? The other thing was we moved the mass from North Island, this is a particular case, from North Island over to Coronado, to the amphib base. And the simple reason was because it was 18 to 25-year-olds going through BUDS training that couldn't leave the base that needed to attend chapel there. So we're looking at some other models. We're doing more partnerships with civilian religious organizations. How can they support us? Recognizing our lack of capacity, we needed to get more partners. And so again, self-assessment. How are we doing? Are we making connection? What's our target audience? How do we measure? And then how do we self-correct to get to that?
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was in the CNO and working for the CNO and Vice Chief when Get Real, Get Better came out. And as we went down this path of learning that led to CNO announcing last year at SNA that the Navy needed to get real and get better, what we recognized is that if you went out into this space that is the Navy and went into any people or culture program, they weren't asking for more, they were asking for less. And so if we were going to provide another program to them without doing something about that tension, it was actually going to make things worse, not better, which led to CNO on his first day letter to the new Chief of Naval Personnel, Admiral Cheeseman, tasking him to advance Navy culture. And what that means simply is to just take everything that's out there, all the things that are old and established, the things that are new, like Get Real, Get Better, some of the OSD, integrated primary prevention initiatives, and take that, simplify, streamline, and align it into a playbook, into a portfolio that's executable at the command level. So what that means for us is we're in the middle of that journey and sending out some, over the next couple of months we'll refine our approach, but it kind of looks a little bit like this. We know that Navy core values, honor, courage, commitment will remain the foundation of who the Navy is. What we learned is that in boot camp, our sailors were taught warrior toughness on how to approach problem solving in life. But in the fleet, we had a program called Expanded Operational Stress Control. And that was a little bit like Hatfields and McCoys. They didn't neatly integrate, and it was based off of the wrong value set, not really focused on the sailor being the customer of the programs. So you ground in core values, you have this tough and resilient mindset. Our teams are working to bring those programs together into one program. And then we just focus on three things really simply. We focus on building great people, to steal from you their minds, their bodies, and their spirits. Focus on building great leaders, to build on the Navy Leader Development Framework 3.0 into a new framework. Ideally, it'll focus on competence, character, and then culture, empowering leaders to build great culture. And then the last thing we focus on are teams. Part of the problem solving is I came into the office and went through all the instructions. And for those that have looked at the Navy's, for instance, suicide prevention or sexual assault prevention instructions, there's all these things that are out there about GMT. And there's all these things out there about having someone assigned or putting up a flyer in your workspace. And then you ask yourself, like, are those the real effective things? Has anyone gone through GMT and had their life changed? And most people, it has not happened. I apologize for anyone who's written GMT in the room. You're great people. So what we realized is, so you get to this spot in all the instructions, and I had started this space looking at what makes a team great, what are the characteristics that make a great innovating team? And then you look at what are the characteristics that make a great problem-solving team? And then I would talk to my leads for suicide and sexual assault and say, hey, there's all of these cultural preconditions in the instruction that commanders are supposed to create. Do we have anything to get after that? We do not. Oh. And so what you realize is that what I would call the cultural preconditions of a great team are very consistent across those areas. And so as we focus on building great people, their minds, bodies, and spirits, great leaders with character, competence, and culture, we'll also focus on key areas of a team. And the DEOX data helps show us and points us in the right direction. And so my team is working on it. I don't know what it's going to end up being, but our starting point was that you focus on a team that's connected, cohesive, and inclusive. And then you go after specific risk factors that are in DEOX. Moderate to high levels of stress. You go after racial and sexual harassment. And by focusing on some of those areas in addition to a toxic work environment or a hostile work environment, you think that what you'll do is create great teams that'll create the right conditions for us not only dominate in combat, but also prevent harmful behaviors. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. So to flip that on its head, you know, in my day job, I look at lessons learned quite a bit. And a lot of times in lessons learned, we focus on what went wrong and how we're going to go back and fix it. but we often miss the good stuff of best practices and things that people did right. How do we capture that and share it? So I was curious if you have any programs where you looked at them and said, hey, that actually works pretty good. Maybe we could double down on it. Maybe we could expand it. Anything that you can think of that might fall in that category for anyone who'd like to take it.
Go first, Rob.
Yeah, I can jump on that. One of our success stories, I think, is all in the realm of the small boys, putting chaplains on destroyers. Sure. A few years ago, we looked at that whole construct and which command was having the most problems in the surface forces. And destroyers, the numbers were up. And yet we looked at commands where the numbers were down, and one of the factors was having a chaplain on board. And so SWO boss, looking at the data, asked us to put chaplains on destroyers, and that's turned out to be the right answer. As we've implemented it, what we found is the partnership between the chaplains and the mental health providers has been significant in terms of keeping sailors into the system, keeping them into the military healthcare system rather than putting them out on the network. So as we've had chaplains on board the small boys, there's a good opportunity for triage to see a lot of the things that people are facing that become kind of turned into a disease are just normal stresses of life. Sure. Where we all went through that. We were kind of adults in training. We moved from our parents' home to our own lives, and they had stresses. And so the chaplains were providing a good triage in that regard, but if it does get to the point where they need help, they're able to move them to the invented mental health providers. Sure. There on the waterfront there in San Diego particularly, and that's been the next step. If it's even more in need for more care, it moves then to medical treatment facility. The result in being able to pull the numbers down in terms of what we've put out into the network have been significant. And the value for the sailor is if we can keep them out of the network, we have a greater chance of getting them back into being a productive sailor and being part of the team. And so the success there of putting the chaplain on the destroyers has been significant. Well, and sometimes you're a victim of your own success because now it's...
Don't have enough chaplains.
Yeah, now we don't have enough chaplains, but please, go home, find another chaplain for us, please. But there are other communities, too, that are looking at that model is seeming to be effective. Right. Should we grow even further in some of these other communities? That's a good story for me. I mean, I think we can get more chaplains, but yeah, that's a success story. What was interesting, though, is once you're acting on data and you're moving and you make some changes, there's also some things that were unaccounted for. Okay. And I think that we all need to kind of recognize that even when we make changes, even for the positive, there are going to be things we didn't account for, some successes that are okay.
So maybe some gaps ashore or places you have.
Right. There are some, and it's shown us, that there are some places that we probably need more chaplains as well.
Well, I hate to break it to you, sir, but I was part of the team that took the Manning document for the new frigate to Admiral Kitchener. As he is wont to do, he took his glasses and went, "Where's the chaplain?" And
right.
Which threw the entire AVC team into a frenzy. But there's a chaplain as part of the FFG.
Exactly. But I appreciate the demand signal. Now it's my job to beat the bushes and get some more. So
it's a warning order.
Yeah,
yes,
thanks, John.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that, as I was talking earlier about focusing on connectedness and cohesion and inclusion, what we see and sometimes the success stories we get are that when a command is given the tools, the time, the energy to focus on building these things, great things happen. From a cruiser CO that decides that they're going to write an instruction on how to do human factors councils as a way to make sure that their command on a periodic basis is investing in knowing their people, to just looking at the data and realizing that commands that have high connectedness have about 4 times fewer harmful behaviors happen to them by building that. And we've also had times when, for those that are unaware, haven't seen, we published a mental health playbook, really designed to help set expectations for leaders, help guide them into hard conversations, help them understand when those conversations turn to a mental health issue, and then how to navigate the system to get them the right care at the right time. It was really interesting. My deputy was in the office, just kind of getting work done, I'm sure, answering my tasking. And he had someone from our building walk in, not associated with our team, with tears in her eyes, just saying, hey, I went through a really dark period. I was suicidal, and I was hoping that someone in the Navy would say what you guys wrote. And so it just goes to show that foundation, the foundational element of working on belonging, working on cohesion, connectedness, inclusion, is the right antidote, is the right way to help get after some of these problems. Our mandate is to find a way to simplify, streamline, and align it so that it can be executable, and then to also train it earlier in a career. So often, as we talk about in our team, that if you go to a command that's in the midst of executing, they're already juggling a bowling ball, a flaming torch, and a chainsaw. So to go to them with a new program and say, hey, can you wedge this in? They just look at you and ask for some relief. So what we train, how we train, and when we train, I think will help us take some of these lessons that we're learning and apply them in a way that'll be really impactful.
Great.
All right. One of the programs that the Coast Guard has been able to build on over time from a foundation is almost decades ago now, we had started with something called the Care Newborn Children, and then we built that into the temporary separation program, which is kind of the precursor for career intermission. And that has allowed any officer to basically temporarily separate from the Coast Guard for a period of time, and take advantage of to have a child, to go to grad school, and then have that opportunity to come back in the Coast Guard at their same rank or rate, and then continue on through their career. And we have them affiliate with the reserves now, and we do those things. But one of the things that we were finding is that timing-wise, we did a study, a women's retention study a couple years ago, and what we were finding was we were still losing officers and enlisted folks at that 8 to 12 year range when it was time to have a family. You're making decisions about, hey, which one should I do? And what we found was that we could actually change policies to implement some things that might allow moms, parents to stay in instead of making that decision. And one of the things that we've been able to do is, we created the situation where, say you're on an operational unit or you're on a shore unit, and you're worried about what your peers are going to think of you, your shipmates are going to think of you if you take 8 weeks off, now 12 weeks off. The Coast Guard implemented a program. We would actually identify through our surge staffing process a backfill for you, a reserve officer with your same qualifications, and then pay for that person to come on active duty for that window of time, so that there would be no operational loss at the unit. There would be no feelings of guilt, from the member, because there is a strong sense of, hey, I don't want to let my shipmates down when you're doing that, and we found that the women's retention study, just like most of these programs, when you implement things for families, they're good for everybody. They make sense for everybody, and so we were able to identify a lot of things that were kind of buried in there. Grooming standards, ponytails, fingernail polish things, the shipments for lactating mothers. We could make those shipments home. I don't know if Coast Guard Mutual Aid's in the crowd, but they help us fund some of those shipments. So those type of programs, if you just take a step back and think, hey, is there something that's already allowed in policy, and we just need to either put some money or some effort or a policy change to it? We've been able to kind of think about those things in that way.
Sure, thank you very much. That's a great, talking to some of our commanders, that new policy has sent a couple of shockwaves through. So hopefully you wrote that one down, sir. I think that'd be great to plug our reservists in there. Okay, so we've talked about it a little bit, but retention, at the end of the day, retention and recruitment are some of our biggest challenges, perhaps even more so nowadays. And I was curious, from where you sit, what do you see as the biggest challenge, the biggest barrier to either or both? And what can more the deck plates, what can be done about it?
So when you take a look at, again, part of the journey that we've been on, Answer Encino's call to advance our culture, we started really taking a deep look at generational differences. And one of the most helpful studies that we found was from Gallup. And if you think about it left to right, they listed 4 generations. So they had the boomers, Gen X, and then older millennials, and then younger millennials and Gen Z. And they asked them, what do you value from your leadership in a workplace? What do you want when you go to work? And there's a break between the first two, between the boomers and Gen X, and the latter two, the millennials and Gen Z. The first two were consistent in what they prioritized. Number one was ethical leadership. Number two was, do you care about me? And number three was, do you provide stability? But then things change as you get to the newer generation. For the older millennials, number one was, do you care about me? Number two was ethical leadership, and then number three was transparency in leadership. And then for the younger millennials and for the Gen Z, it was, do you care about me? Are you ethical? And then do you value inclusion in how you approach the workplace? And so for me, from my perspective, it's, we need the Navy to become one of those places, and it has been for many of us, where you started at one spot and you got to a better spot, you're proud of your service, you're a better person. That's not the same experience for everybody. And so I think from my perspective, it's important that we help leaders focus on how we build our people, our leaders and our teams, and then transition the way that a leader looks at their people, recognizing that they want you to be more transparent as a leader, that they want you to value inclusion in how you lead your workplace. Not doing so for those of us the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus, or learned about love languages at some point in your career, in your life. If you're speaking in one language, love language, and the other person's not receiving it well, it's not their fault, it's yours, right? And so as leaders, we have to make that pivot as we lead the younger generation to value the things that they value, to start with how much they matter to us, with a keen sense of mission, so that when young sailors go home, they talk about the great things they did in the Navy and try to get their friends to join, as opposed to telling stories that wouldn't inspire anyone to join.
Yeah, I would foot stomp what Brett says in terms of connection. And what we hear so much from sailors, why did you join the Navy? Well, to be part of something bigger than myself, and this, at its heart, that's kind of a spiritual question, right? To be part of something bigger than yourself, to be connected with other people in that mission, that's really the leadership challenge, is to create these people of character that are connected, and it's in the connection that they want to stay. And for a lot of the young people that are joining the sea services, they're coming looking for connection. A lot of them didn't have it, may have come from homes where they didn't have connection, or in social situations where they didn't have connection, and so they come to us looking for that. We have to acknowledge that. We have to recognize it, not to say ignore it, but to acknowledge them that this is one of the needs of this generation, and we can make a difference in their lives by building that connection.
Awesome. Thank you.
If I could jump on that real quick before we pass it is, so if you're in the audience and you've been in the military, or you still are, think how much time you've spent reading manuals about your weapon system. Or think how much time you've spent in class learning about the tactics for your weapon system. Now pause and consider how many times you've been taught how to build connection and connectedness in your command, or how to build some of these other things, right? You recognize and so that's the heart of this, right? We have huge manuals for complicated things like machines, and not much when it comes to complex things like people. And so making that pivot is at the heart of what we're talking about.
Awesome.
Yeah, great, thanks. So I agree with what these guys said about connectedness. In the Coast Guard, I think what we're seeing a lot of is, the down range effects of that military life is just hard. I mean, it's difficult. We're asking people to serve. We're asking them to continually move their families. At critical junctures, we're asking, folks to carry, a cell phone 24/7, when they are in port and stand duty and do these type of things. There's lots of walks of life that do that kind of thing. And I think for us, what we're seeing is that people will continue to serve as long as it makes sense for them and it makes sense for their families. And so if we have an opportunity to change policies in a way that continues to reap that benefit for them, our bases aren't big enough. We're kind of dispersed throughout smaller units throughout the country and on the coast. But we are trying to kind of centralize our larger ports where our ships are and our bases are, and then put some other things around there so that families have an opportunity to go back and forth and do those things. That's going to take us a while to kind of build that in there. But where we can provide geographic stability, where we can provide some of these career options to make a decision, for instance, on the enlisted side, if you get advanced, our policy has been we move you. Even if you advance, you want to make great, you want to get paid, a higher salary for you and your family, then we congratulations, we're gonna move you somewhere else. So now what we're doing is we're kind of banding billets together at the E4, E5, E6 level so that you have the same specialty, and then you can maybe stay at that same unit for your full tour rather than advance and get kind of, what in some view is being punished for that. The other thing that we've done recently, and we're still seeing it with the, what the impacts are going to be and how we're going to manage it across all of our operational and shore units and staff units, is we have kind of formalized remote and telework. And so, how is that going to work? We're figuring that out, but if you view that at least every billet has the opportunity to at least consider telework, and then on a in some more extreme cases or special circumstances for remote work, but if that is an opportunity to allow somebody to stay at the unit that they're at least part-time and not move their family, I've been walking around the convention today, and I see at least a handful of people who are in suits right now for that very reason. Just because, hey, my kids are entering high school, it just doesn't make sense for me to move again. My parents are getting up in age. My wife or husband has a very, very good paying job. Love the service, but it doesn't make sense for us to uproot that other person in a job that won't transmute somewhere else. So those are the type of things that we're trying to get our mind around.
That's awesome. That's right. And so, back to your equipment manual, if I can just give a plug for the mental health manual, I thought that was a really well done piece, as well as the suicide prevention. So we're starting to get some of those tech manuals for people, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so we're about halfway through. I thought at this point I would kind of open the floor up to the audience. And we got a few more, so we probably don't have room for everyone to ask a question, but we can at least get half, I think, in the 30 minutes. So I think they come up to the mic to ask a question. Is that right? The center mic is open. And if anybody has a question, please come on up.
Oh, that looks like a plant.
It's the courageous.
Yeah.
Hey, you're a plant.
I write her fit rep, so it better be a good question.
We've been having a really good conversation about culture today, connection, and everything sounds really wonderful and awesome, and it's a place that I want to serve in. However, what and how do we get those who are the skeptics and the non-believers on board, those who benefit from the status quo? It's for the whole panel.
First off, I'm not sure everybody benefits from the status quo. The Navy certainly doesn't benefit from the status quo. It's going to require us, I think, to do better listening and get some small wins. In our world, the small wins was getting chaplains closer to folks who need to connect with chaplains. So that's a small win. But there are some systemic things that we need to attend to, and the only way we're going to know those is by listening and kind of pulling the string on that. It's like, some of the things that we don't know is out there because generationally we were raised differently. That would be my first step there. I don't know if the boss is going to answer. I give you a little bit of time to think about it.
I appreciate that. And thanks. Pound Cake's awesome. We have a really flat, transparent organization, and I have to remind myself that she's a lieutenant most days because she's smarter than most of us. So hey, I think that there's a couple of things for the folks that are firmly attached to the status quo. I would just go back to time in the day. If you're rising up in the leadership ranks and you can build connectedness, cohesion, and inclusion, you'll have more time in your day because people are going to do, by the data and the science says people will do less harmful things. And every time someone does a harmful thing, it requires leadership time, focus, energy, attention away from mission to handle that thing. So just from a selfish standpoint, do it for that reason because you get more time in the day. The other thing I would say is that, and I'm trying to get to the science in this, but we will never, as a Navy, I'm sure headlines will say this tomorrow, we'll never be able to afford all the people we need. We're always going to have gaps at sea. But in a world that you would say that you have 100 people in your command and you only get 90, so you're 10 people down. But now if each one of those people in your command, that assumes that each person is operating at 100%. But again, the science, the data, the neuroscience, because we can measure the brain now, says that if you're a woman and you're a victim of sexual harassment, then your level of performance goes down here. And then all of the things that happen in all these bad environments actually pull away from the completeness of the individual. And so what's happening when we have these sometimes historically or toxic or hostile environments is that you're actually creating like virtual gaps in your organization because people just aren't willing to give all of themselves to it. And so if you're just trying to accomplish the mission, doing this gives you more time and it gives you more units of people power to be able to accomplish it, and I hope that works. It's interesting, I had one friend that I was explaining some of this to, and he was kind of a traditionalist, and I was expecting him to kind of give me the, and he kind of did. But then what he came to, he started thinking about it and found me a couple minutes later, and what I realized what he was missing, and he asked for this, is he said a lot of leaders want to do this, they just don't know how. And so if you can give them the tools and resources to be able to develop some of these things along the way, they may do that. So thanks.
All right. The only thing I'll add is, in the Coast Guard, we benefit from having, all of these things are coming from senior leadership down, and so it's ingrained in our admiral level, our flag level, also our gold badges and our silver badges, and then we're starting on the other end as well. We're starting at boot camp, we're starting at A school. And then we have mid-period, mid-career kind of leadership requirements that we're having everybody buy into. And the expectation is that at every level, that commanders are building this into their command philosophies, that they're monitoring these. We have some luxury because we're a small outfit, so we can kind of oversee how those things go. But I think for us the key is, when you make policies and you implement things that are benefiting everybody, that everybody can see, hey, this means something to me. And by the way, we are the Coast Guard's, on our enlisted side, we're about 3,000 people short right now. So that's about 7-8% of the enlisted workforce. So we can't spare anybody. We need everybody to be healthy, and we need to take care of each other. So hopefully that'll be pervasive.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Colonel Scott Gregg. I'm in the Air Force, obviously. Question regarding recruiting, and it kind of ties into the last question there. It seems everybody's always short on manning, and we want to make sure that we retain the right people as well. Military's been one of the most respected institutions in the country, but we've seen in recent years that level of support is falling in the public. And I think maybe in part that's due to some of the high-profile negative media cases that we see regarding sexual assault, suicide, sexual harassment. But we have a lot of good news, and I think just what's been presented here this afternoon, what the Navy is doing, I think should be reassuring to a lot of people who might be considering military service, or to the parents and influencers who might be recommending that. So Admiral Fagan said in her opening comments, we need to tell our story. Admiral Barada, you said military service is hard, but it's also rewarding. Otherwise, we wouldn't still be here after 30 plus years too. So my question is, how are you all working with your recruiting service and public affairs to share the good work that we're doing that might help counter some of that public perception? And then ultimately, I think it might help with recruiting not only in the Navy, but the Joint Force as well.
I won't speak for our Chief of Information, Ryan Perry, but I'll share some of our conversations. Thanks for the question, by the way. One of the things that our Chief of Information has been focused on for years is proving the value of the Navy to the American public. And I think the 60 Minutes episode that many folks saw over the last couple of weeks was an example of that. One of the things they realized was a kind of a shortcoming of our approach was that we weren't doing a good job of communicating first to our own people. And I would throw out sailor pay as an example, where there's a lot of problem there that's getting better, but how do you message and build trust and confidence with a generation that's been told to not have trust or confidence in large institutions? So pivoting away from just messaging on the value of a Navy to let's build some trust with our workforce and then allow that to permeate out through our recruiters is what we're working on right now. It's interesting because it's not as instinctive as one might think, and it's taken a lot of work, but we're trying to pivot to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll, from the Coast Guard side, you know, I agree with you. We have a great story to tell. I think there are so many benefits to military service, and we have a lot of luck telling that story when we can get to folks. And I think our bigger problem right now on the Coast Guard side is that, you know, as the comment outside, we have a brand awareness problem. We have a lack of recruiters. We've kind of taken some of this for granted, being able to recruit in the areas where we are historically. And over the last 4 years, even before COVID, before we, you know, lost the opportunity to get into high schools, you know, and in person, it's hard to talk somebody into coming into military service without talking to them knee to knee sometimes. And that's what we've kind of found. And we only have about 270 recruiters right now. So, you know, we're, you know, competing against, you know, some of the outfits with thousands of recruiters. So, you know, that part of it, expanding those recruiting, expanding call centers, you know, into that world of work, expanding how we're doing marketing and targeted marketing on folks. But when we can get to people, I think, you know, all the military services resonate very well. But I think this connectedness is the issue, is the concern, that a lot of people don't understand military service. They don't understand the benefits of it. And so the ability to get with those folks and kind of communicate, you know, hey, even if you don't know anybody in the military right now, which is the case, we just have to find a better way to connect, I think.
I would say the challenge, it's real. It's very difficult to get the story out. But folks on this panel are probably the wrong people to tell the story, because I think the value of like the 60 Minutes story, it started out with the professionalism of our people, particularly the younger people. And I think it's the younger sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, their family members, when they tell the story, that's when it has effect. So what I'm trying to do is get my second tour chaplains out there, the young ones out there, and say, go back and tell your story, because the old man telling the story just sounds like, you know, something from Saving Private Ryan or something. But you get that young lieutenant out there saying, hey, let me tell you what I get to do, and then that has impact.
That's right. You're like the TV dad in that one commercial.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, question.
Good afternoon. My name is CTR3 Soto. I'm from Cryptologic Warfare Activity 67, based out of Meade. The question I have is also about retention, but I would like to say that this is probably only problems that the intel community, junior sailors in the intel community have. But my question is, what type of incentives are in place or you guys are pushing out in order to keep retention within the intel community? Because I would agree that junior sailors are pretty much past the sea stories, and it's going to take a little bit more than, oh, this is what we did out at sea to get them, and we're very, I don't want to say know your value, because some people overestimate their value, but we're very about the stats, what can be provided to us in exchange for our service. So considering that the removal of tuition assistance, you know, with the first 3 years, and then you have to have 2 years on your contract after the first 3 years, that's pretty bothersome to junior sailors. As you stated already, large pay issues within the Navy that's affecting many junior sailors. I would also say, like to say that in the intel community, we have just job placement issues where the job that we do on shore does not replicate what we do at sea, but we have to go to sea in order to be a quote-unquote real sailor, even though the contract we signed, the job description, says otherwise. And just working next to contractors all day who say, hey, if you get out after your first contract, we'll give you X, Y, Z. And it's a large amount of money. So what incentives are you guys pushing or already have in place to keep these junior sailors?
So what else? So CTR3 Soto, right? So afterwards we'll exchange emails, and I'll make sure that you get a better answer than the one I'm going to provide you right now, because I don't have my finger on the pulse of that. I know that I meet with the Chief of Naval Personnel consistently, and I'm in the room when they're talking about these things. And I know that they're working to look at the data and provide the max amount of bonuses and compensation that we can for each and every rating. And so how that gets manifest into a strategy for retaining you, I don't know, but I will find out and I'll provide information for you. So just make sure when I leave, I'll get your email. Are you in the Navy Global or on some secret network?
I don't think I'm on the first one you said, because I haven't heard of it.
Okay.
But I will definitely
We'll
get you
connect.
before.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome.
All right, the only thing, similarly, I don't know anything about the Navy side, but I would tell you, I think your question is very insightful. We're having the same issues with a lot of our technical, our cyber folks, our intel folks, a lot of our critical specialties. And so, on our side, what we have is a workforce planning team that kind of looks at, hey, is there a way to incentivize folks, and whether they're monetary or non-monetary, and some of these things might be, rotational, hey, how long does somebody stay at Fort Meade? Does it make sense to leave them, or at least let you bounce back and forth? So there's some opportunities to kind of think about that. But I don't know the Navy side of things, but I do think there's a lot of folks who are sitting in your same seat thinking about the same things.
I would just foot stomp. There's a challenge here because your rate is particularly attractive out in the world, and I'm just not sure the Navy will be able to keep up with industry if the only incentives are going to be monetary. They're going to need to be something beyond the monetary, beyond just, I get paid this much. To be part of something bigger than yourself, to be making a difference in the world, and maybe in some respects protecting the future of your grandchildren, those are kind of hard to quantify, and those are hard things to balance. And I think we should be able to talk about those things as well, in addition to the money.
May I ask a follow-on question? I agree that it's probably going to be nearly impossible to match what the civilian sector can do financially. But what about just regular CTR3 Soto wants to stay technical, but because he's ranking up so fast, because we're undermanned, and because it's such an important job, I only have one billet where I'm technical, and the rest of my career I'm leadership. How do we combat that?
So you're going to go and recruit? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. It's just hard. It really is.
10 more of you.
Yeah. But that's a struggle in every community. It really is. I mean, in aviation, where I come from, there's a lot of people that don't want to fleet up and be a commanding officer. They just want to stay flying all the time. And it's always a tension based off of the overall needs of the Navy to provide those opportunities to stay technical as you advance.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to call an audible. We have 10 minutes. Thank you. Great question. Round of applause for a bit of an audible. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in 10 minutes. So what I'd like to do is ask the question, and then let's try to maybe one person answer it from the panel.
I think that's great.
And if you have a compelling thing you have to say, great, but kind of go like table tennis here.
Gotcha.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. I'm Matt Brown. I lead a mental health care company called Chimney Trail. We specialize in providing cognitive behavioral therapy solutions for suicide prevention. We started it for our military, and we want to get to as many people as we can. So first I want to say thank you for your efforts in this space, because it's so serious, and we are confident that you're taking it seriously because you always pick up the phone when I call. So that's a great start. I was going to come up because I'm a business leader, and any business leader, in a sense, asks about budget and how we can contract more effectively and that sort of thing. But your talk inspired me to ask a different question. So I went to the Naval Academy, and they made sure that I could do a certain number of push-ups, pull-ups, and sit-ups before I was able to go there. But what I never got was any sort of instruction on how the brain works, how cognitive behavioral therapy works, and how you can overcome the distortions that cause anxiety and depression. And I was wondering if there are any initiatives in our officer accession pipeline to train them. And the reason I ask is because I'm sort of a embarrassing buzzsaw on LinkedIn all the time, and everybody pings me and they say, hey, we're having these suicides because of toxic leadership environments. And I'll go on podcasts and I'll say, remember that leaders are people too. So we got to make sure that they're trained in these sorts of like CBT tools and other things like that. Are there initiatives out there that I just don't know about within the service academies or ROTC officer accession programs? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Always good to see you. So foundational for me was at the Air Force's DEI Summit about a year ago, and had an officer say, hey, sir, it's great that you're talking about all these things, but when are we going to actually teach leaders to lead as you're talking about? And so as part of building great leaders in the people and teams framework, rewriting our Navy Leader Development Forum will be the first step towards that. And we recognize the chasm. We think about every accession source and what you train people on. And what we need to do is create consistency from wherever you are to your first tour and then create expectations that grow as you advance. And so we'll get there. I think it's going to take a couple of years, but I think helping people understand that there is science and not just experience here to bring to bear, and then helping people value it the same way, recognizing that we easily care about our our physical wellness, but not so clearly about our mental wellness, and just equating those two and moving forward is what we'll do.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Question?
Good afternoon, Ensign Williams from C5I Service Center. And my brother, we met back in July at NNOA.
NNOA, I
And
remember.
I brought up National Society of Black Engineers to you.
I remember.
My command sent me. There was over 13,000 highly educated engineers. Recruiting didn't come with me. For recruiting and retention, we definitely got to go. They're highly trained, educated, they're top-tier engineers. Navy has the NSBE chapter. They were there, the recruiting was there, and also their academy was there too, so we got to catch up with them. In regards to retention, the culture, we mentioned DEI, and also the different culture shifts of generations. I've been in the Coast Guard for almost 9 years. My lieutenant was the first person I ever heard tell somebody, she told me, you have a child, don't make your wife take her to the doctor all the time. Go to the doctor. Take your child to that. So we need to change it. How are we getting after changing our culture to where everybody can be a parent, not just a mother, and also get rid of microaggressions to our diversity components. For example, asking me for my shave chip during inspections, or saying I only made it to direct commission because I'm black, even though I'm highly qualified.
Okay, so a lot in there. I would say a couple things. One, I think the Coast Guard is focused on those issues. So there are avenues for you to address, at the local unit. I think it's an emphasis for leadership, for DE&I. From the standpoint of families, I think, having this conversation with your supervisor about, how your family, is involved with these things. I think it's been trained more and more from the leadership level down through our CMCs, through our mid-grade officers, in order to include families. And I think if we're going to have this conversation about, taking care of our shipmates, taking care of our junior folks, I think that has to include families where it can, especially in those units where we have the opportunity to. And I think what we're finding now, I think what we found during COVID, where we had opportunities, we never thought we could telework. We never thought that we would be able to get the same work done. I think our minds have been expanded in ways they never were before. And so I think it's incumbent on the leader, it's incumbent on the members, and it's incumbent on the entire command to kind of adopt that conversation. Because if members don't have it in their minds, hey, I'm going to take this time off, I'm going to take my leave. I think at the Coast Guard, we're famous for losing 20, 30 days of leave a year. And I think in the Air Force, in other services, that is an evaluation factor. And so I think what we have to start to do in the Coast Guard is grade ourselves on that type of scale. But I will tell you, I think there are very few leaders in the Coast Guard that would tell somebody you cannot go to your child's medical appointment. But I think there are a lot of members who won't ask that question because there's this kind of incumbent pressure on you to do that. So I think more education needs to happen. I think our DEOX surveys are a good way to do that. I think having a conversation at the LDACs, bringing these type of issues up, I think it's an education process. I do think the folks who came in 30 years ago do not have the same mindset of the folks who are walking in the door. But I also think if we think that it can't change, I think that's also a mistake, because I think it can change. I think we have seen seismic changes just over the last 2 to 3 years. So I would say just continue to do that, continue to have those conversations in the avenues at the commands that are available to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Sir?
Thank you for your talks, all of you. Probably for one of the two of you. Several months ago, I heard a talk from one of your counterparts in 06 at one of the military personnel organizations that essentially said, we just need a little more of this and that and the specific kind of data, and then we will tell you who to promote. And that was pretty clearly the message of the talk, and it actually scared me quite a bit. How do you see juggling between data, its inherent limitations, the flawed information and all that, versus the asks of leaders to make judgments off of things, sometimes off of data, but not always off of data? How do you see balancing the objective and the subjective in some of these complex decisions, questions, choices about their people, et cetera?
I'll just start on our side. There's been a push, over time to kind of just base assignments, base promotions on, and let a computer do it. We can figure out these things based on qualifications. I will say that we do think there's a lot of value in data. I think data will help us manage talent. It will help us manage what people are, what their competencies are, what they're interested in. And I think adding in some of these human factors of, hey, what people want to do will help us retain them a little bit longer and manage that talent. But I don't think we can ever get to a point where we can push a button, AI, machine learning, tell us this, and then we go with that. I think right now, it can be a mix of things. But I think data can be a powerful tool for us to make better decisions. Like right now, we don't have that. We're based on paper records, and we're doing a lot of tummy rubbing. And I think we can get beyond that. We can do better by the workforce.
Yeah, I would just say that data is a great starting point for a conversation.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Please.
Hi, my name's Denise, and I'm a former Coast Guard JAG, and I'm also a former Maritime Administration Chief Counsel. And so the question I have for you gentlemen today is, have you examined or considered the overlap between retention, recruitment, sexual harassment, and sexual assault? And I look at those four because 65,000 claims have been filed in the Department of Defense for sexual harassment and sexual assault since 2010. And if we have those numbers, and those individuals are all probably out of the military right now, and they're all probably telling not a very good tale, how do we recruit people to come in? By the way, my family's business was the military. And how do you get them to stay in? Because if you're hearing 65,000 men and women, as I sadly learned in the Maritime Administration, what are we doing? How do we improve?
Yeah. Thanks for your question, Denise. You asked if we're thinking about it like all the time, sometimes in the middle of the night, because the data is not helpful in a way that's encouraging here. What I would say it's important, people that come to our position, you can agree or disagree with this, it's just my supposition, that people that get to our spot, we execute tasks and we knock things out. The things that we're talking about, from DEI to sexual assault to sexual harassment to suicide, the belief consistently, and I was just having this conversation with my team this morning, is that you can get a check in a block and we'll be better. And it's not. It's sustained, and you have to go at it. Especially, it's not as though society is attending or is getting to some incredibly impeccable moral high ground, and then there's just vast of bad behavior in the military. People are tempted when they leave the workplace, and we just have to aggressively attack it all the time. And from a leadership standpoint, it is a sustained campaign, not a 1 year because a report comes out or because a congressman gets upset.
You're welcome. Thank you. We got 1 minute. We can do 2 questions real quick.
I'm from New York. I can talk super fast. Hello, Admirals. How are you? So I wrote down notes so I wouldn't make any mistakes. So my question is a retention issue question. So Admiral, you mentioned earlier some kind of core values for some people in regards to why they want to stay. Do they care about me? Transparency, inclusivity. So those things were important to people depending on the generation, kind of where the order went. Then Admiral, you mentioned that we were trying to instill policies that benefit everyone. So all-inclusive, essentially. So with that being said, how do we as organizations, as leaders, change the stigma that is prevalent, at least where I'm seeing it? By the way, I'm sorry, I'm Lori Kennedy, GMR from C. Of a modern-day caste system, for lack of a better term, where there's not consistent, equitable accountability across the organizations.
I'll take a little stab at it, but I will tell you, I think just like some of these other policies that we've been looking at, where we looked at, women's retention, we looked at, underrepresented minority retention. I think, the enlisted system and the officer system have evolved since 1790 for the Coast Guard, and I think, there's some things, as the commandant said, hey, I don't want to hear, we've always done it this way. But I think there's things intuitively that we don't even know that we're doing. And so I think, the enlisted pay study that's going on right now, I think that's going to be valuable for us. But I think to have a broader look at, hey, especially in the Coast Guard, we ask our enlisted folks to do an awful lot, to assume a lot of responsibility, to take command, to do, to lead detachments, to do all kinds of things. Even at the E3, even at the LPO level, at the leading seaman level, we're asking these folks to do a lot. So is that commensurate? How do we treat them? You're right. I think, some of the points you bring up is, hey, it's, if there's a conduct issue, it's real easy to separate an enlisted person and then let them, have them leave without anything to take with them. Those type of things, those type of policies, I think are worth looking at. But it's going to take an effort to kind of take a step back and say, hey, does this make sense for the workforce that we're bringing in right now and what we're asking them to do, especially?
Great. Okay. One more, and then the music starts to play.
There you go. I'm Grady Tucker. I'm working on a ServiceNow project with the chaplains on spirituality. And one of the metrics I don't think we're tracking is sleep deprivation. And I've seen this come up over and over again on ship accidents, suicide issues, and that sort of thing. I have a background in some sleep study work that I've done. And I know, for example, in the United States and Canada, you can't be a truck driver without taking a sleep apnea test. You can still be a truck driver, you just have to use the CPAP machine at night. We've done studies on shift workers, policemen, firemen, doctors, nurses. That third shift is a killer. And the reason for that is because what we've found in the brain science, which has evolved a lot in the last 10 years, is that if a person's been awake for 16 hours, they're now considered legally drunk. Not at work for 16 hours, just awake. So if their shift starts at 8 p.m., they just had dinner at 6 to 8 with their family, put the kids to bed, they go to work, but they got up at 8 o'clock in the morning to do something else with the kids, wash the car, cut the lawn. Now it's 2, 3 in the morning. Why do we give someone who's legally drunk a loaded weapon, $1 million fire truck, a ship? Do you think the military might consider making sleep training a mandatory part of leadership training and the workforce training? Because I think it would have a significant effect.
Thank you for the question. That's one of the reasons that we're trying to focus so hard on mind, body, and spirit with very deliberate expectations. Within mind, it's your psychological health, your social networks, and your financial health. Within body, it's your nutritional, your physical, and just your medical and dental check, and then we've talked about spiritual readiness. If you're not doing any of those things well, to include sleep, then you're probably going to get to extremists or hurt yourself, right? And so what we're working on is just a clear way to be able to kind of do a head-to-toe check with our folks and have that be okay. Because I think as we get into some of these softer areas, because when we started, there wasn't the science behind this, right? And now there is clear science, and we just need to reflect that science in a way that's good, right, and true for our people. So we'll get there. It's just going to take a little bit of time, and then just helping people. I mean, part of warfighting is being tough and helping people understand that you need to have that gear that you can get into when you need it, but you don't need to perhaps use it all the time. And so some of those things that we've prided ourselves as service members, I think will just come out at time. Because when I was junior, I used to pride myself on how little sleep or whatever I could go and push myself through, and just helping recognize that that shouldn't be a standard that we ask people to aspire to anymore.
Yes, sir. I'll just pile on, since that's kind of my bread and butter too, is there are new policies out there. The Surface Force has adopted circadian watches. The new OPNAV instruction mandates their use for all of the Navy. And the new Suicide Prevention Manual had a recommendation of non-rotational shifts and at least 8 hours of sleep time allotted per sailor per 24-hour period. So getting there, but I think we're 5 years into a 10-year cultural change when it's no longer a badge of honor. So I was going to give a couple minutes to each person to wrap up, unless somebody wants to take over the room. I appreciate your patience. Maybe 1 minute each to just any final thoughts.
I'll jump on it. I couldn't help but think at some of the questions we talked about in terms of culture and the destructive behaviors that are going on at their core are solved by character, by addressing who we are as people, and that's a spiritual question. You know, how do we live by our morals, values, ethics, and make our decisions based on those things? we can make all the policy that we want, but it's in the recesses of our heart that our decisions are made. And I think it's important that we, as we build the people, build the warfighter, and encourage them, that we have that attentiveness to the spiritual side.
Awesome. Yeah, and I would just ask for your help. One of the reasons we did the mental health playbook was to just bring some positive energy to this space. And so often, I was laughing with John when he asked me, what are you doing well? I was just going to hang my head, rub my head in front of you, and freak everybody out. But it is that element of there are great things that we do. You all care about the maritime profession, and so help us tell those great stories. Bring positive energy to these things, knowing, and sometimes it's hard. I admit that I'm asking you to trust senior Navy leadership, but we're working hard to get after this and doing our absolute best to make the Navy better each and every day. So when you see a great example, please laud it, please praise it. But then, like the question that came up earlier, but if you see something that's not going so well, just gently call it out and help your organization get better. Thanks.
Thanks. I'll just close. I'm glad we talked about mental health today. Coast Guard had a real tough year in 22. It was one of our highest ever levels-wise. And obviously in a small service that has a huge impact. I think leadership's been doing a great job trying to get more resources out there, telehealth. We've put 13 mental health workers out there in various spots. There's a lot of assist training that's going on. We're trying to get as many people through to be able to kind of recognize these issues. But I think what we've seen during COVID is that people were very isolated, and it was even within the service itself, kind of pulled people apart. Their families were really isolated. We're seeing a lot of issues with dependents now. And so, I just think we have a lot of work to do there probably over the next couple of years. And so just appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about it.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, I couldn't be happier with this panel. I thank you for your thoughts, and thanks for the audience. Great questions. And our time is up. Thank you very much.